If at first you don't succeed, then dust yourself off and try again. Not my words, the words of late great R&B legend Aaliyah. The point is, not every game nails it on the first go. Sometimes, a game introduces an interesting idea or lays the foundation for something that could become special, but we have to wait for a sequel before it properly gets the job done. So it's not a sign of total failure. Look at James Dyson. He tested more than 5,000 prototypes of his bagless vacuum cleaner before he found one that didn't suck. Or did suck, I suppose. Consider these 7 games that were flawed, lacking in something, or just downright bad, but spawned sequels that were actually brilliant.
Stay calm. Concentrate on the screen. Street Fighter 2 is on Super Nintendo. From the arcades, the ultimate combat game. Each fighter has a different technique, an acrobatic move, a hidden punch. It's on the streets now, exclusively on Super Nintendo. Super Nintendo with Street Fighter 2. It's unbeatable.
It makes sense to start with the most obvious example of the lot. There's a reason why when people say Street Fighter, they're actually thinking of Street Fighter 2. Capcom released the original Street Fighter in arcades in 1987, and to its credit, it did come up with some interesting ideas. The deluxe version of the cabinet came with 2 big pads, one for punches and one for kicks, that the player had to slam to perform attacks. The harder you hit the pad, the stronger the attack. It seems Capcom knew it was a bad idea to make players physically assault its game and risk damaging either the cabinet or, their hands. So it also had another cabinet with the standard 6 attack buttons the series and many other fighting games continue to use to this day. There's just one problem. Regardless of which cabinet you used, the first Street Fighter was a load of old bum. Collision detection was a mess, you could only play as Ryu in single player mode, and while there were special moves like his now famous Fireball and Dragon Punch, pulling them off was so temperamental that it made the slot machines in the arcade look like a sure thing by comparison. Of course, we all know what happened next. Capcom went back to the drawing board and came back 4 years later with Street Fighter 2, one of the most important video games of all time. Suffice it to say that the jump from Street Fighter to Street Fighter 2 is the biggest leap in quality for any sequel in video game history. To go from a game that was best known for its weird control gimmick and nothing else, to a game that wrote the rules for an entire genre going forwards is pretty good going.
You win!
Though I reckon they should bring back those big pads, just because it would be a laugh seeing people forced to use them in fighting game tournaments.
I started out with nothing, just a kid from the streets with nothing to lose. Then I met Julius, and everything changed.
Welcome to the 3rd Street Saints.
Once I joined the 3rd Street Saints, everything started going my way.
The enormous success of Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City and San Andreas meant that circa 2006, ambitious developers were keen to make their own open-world city games. Some, like Crackdown, decided to mix things up by adding something unique, namely the ability to perform enormous leaps and chuck cars around like they're made of wood. Not a heavy wood, like oak, I'm talking like balsa wood. The developers at Volition, on the other hand, had no interest in such hoity-toity concepts as originality. Instead, deciding they shouldn't fix what wasn't broken, they made their early Xbox 360 exclusive Saints Row an open-world city game about crime and gang culture.
That's the great thing about this city. It's there for the taking, if you got what it takes.
Saints Row 1 was basically a replica of the 3D GTA games, but without their extremely distinctive sense of humour.
Tommy, how do you take out a snake? You bite him in the ass.
Whatever you say, Umberto.
Tommy.
Distinctive, like I say. Saints Row was a success, sure, but everyone agreed that it was about as original as my erotic first novel, 51 Shades of Grey. Disappointing sales, I'm not gonna lie. Anyway, the general consensus on Saints Row was that it served as a serviceable sample of next-gen open-world crime gameplay to pass the time with until the real-deal main event, Grand Theft Auto 4, came out 2 years later. Perhaps realising that it would always be in the shadow of GTA if it just kept imitating it, Volition decided to take Saints Row 2 in a different direction and lean more heavily on its own distinctive sense of humour.
And I say it's time we take these fools out.
And that can't wait until after dinner?
No.
Yes, distinctive. Like I say. Saints Row 2 was praised for its silliness, and in that way Volition managed to carve out a niche that set the game apart from Rockstar's blockbuster franchise. This niche was carved still deeper with Saints Row the Third, which dialed the daftness up to 11, resulting in one of the most ridiculous open-world games ever made. We all know what eventually happened to Saints Row, but we'll save that story for our list of 7 reboots that were received so poorly they led to Volition being closed down. Just need to think of another 6 and then we'll get right on it.
So it's finally time. Oh, thanks to you, it's the game revival. You helped come true. They said this seems dead. That's a load of yap. And we're here to prove it with this familiar rap.
Sequels aren't always just improved versions of what came before. Sometimes a developer will decide to pull a 180 and attempt something completely different. Did you know the first Dynasty Warriors was a one-on-one fighting game? Well, it was. And did you know the first Animal Crossing was a PvP extraction shooter? Well, it wasn't. When the newly formed Playtonic Games announced in 2015 that it was making a new 3D platformer called Yooka-Laylee, players' ears pricked up. Not because one of the characters was a bat and they were doing it in solidarity, but because of the studio's pedigree. Playtonic was made up of former members of Rare, specifically some of the team who had worked on 1998's Banjo-Kazooie. Fans had been praying for a new Banjo game for decades, and no, that weird car building one on the 360 didn't count. But this Yooka-Laylee looked like it could be the next best thing. It turned out Yooka-Laylee was indeed a faithful spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. A little too faithful, in fact. Seemingly forgetting that 3D platformers had made huge advances in the 2 decades since Banjo-Kazooie, Yooka-Laylee suffered from issues that should have been left behind in the N64 era, especially the camera. It's annoying because there were other cameras from the late 90s that Playtonic could have taken inspiration from instead, to give the player a more stable view, like the one in the Blair Witch Project.
Tell me where you are, John!
If only they'd had a bat friend who could fly them around. Might have gone away. Yooka-Laylee accrued a bit of a cult following nonetheless from weirdos like me, and it was enough to justify making a second game. However, instead of going down the 3D platformer route again, Playtonic decided to start from scratch and make a side-scrolling platformer called Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair, based on another of Rare's classic games, Donkey Kong Country. This time the plan worked a lot better, and Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair is one of the best modern platforming games around. And all it took was flattening that 3D scenery onto a 2D plane, proving that sometimes you just have to accept that the best solution is a change of scenery. Yes, finally, you can watch our videos comfortably at night without blinding yourself. And all it took was 12 years.
Sometimes a game is great on one platform, but rubbish on another. Sometimes that game is followed by a great sequel that is great on both platforms. Case in point, the SNES had its own deficient version of a great game in its port of Mortal Kombat 1.
Scorpion wins.
At the time, violence in video games was a hot topic, so Nintendo, with its family-friendly brand, demanded that the original Mortal Kombat be heavily censored on its console. The result was a version of Mortal Kombat with all the blood replaced by sweat, and most of the gory fatalities replaced by far more boring ones. Instead of Johnny Cage punching someone's head clean off, he just kicked them in the chest. Unlike a decapitation, you could walk that one off in 5 minutes. Nintendo, in fact, pointed to its decision to censor Mortal Kombat during US Senate hearings on video game violence, claiming it was the good guy of the games industry, protecting children and whatnot.
We knew that we would lose money by sanitizing Mortal Kombat, but sanitize it we did.
This wasn't the wisest move on Nintendo's part, as adult players complained that it shouldn't be up to Nintendo to decide what's best for them, and that games should be rated instead of censored. And so, by the time Mortal Kombat 2 came to home consoles, Nintendo had learned its lesson. It allowed the second game to be released uncut on the SNES, bringing it in line with other versions of Mortal Kombat 2. This meant you could pull off all manner of gory fatalities on your opponent, like turning into a dragon and biting their head off, or electrocuting them until they exploded. Try walking that one off. I don't think you will.
Not every game on this list is truly bad. The first Assassin's Creed was, at the time, broadly well received, especially by people who could finally live out their very specific dream of climbing enormous towers and swan diving into tiny haystacks. But it's also fair to say the game didn't live up to the substantial hype generated by Ubisoft and subsequent high hopes of aspiring assassins.
Are troubled times in which we live.
Assassin's Creed 1 received decent review scores because the parkour mechanic was satisfying and the crowds made each town feel genuinely alive. The problem was, once you'd stalked one target, killed them and then escaped to the rooftops with guards chasing after you, you'd pretty much seen everything the Assassin's Creed 1 experience had to offer. The rest of the game just did the same thing over and over again, like a sort of medieval Groundhog Day with OG assassin Altair in the role of Bill Murray. Except instead of attempting to woo Andy McDowell, he was stabbing someone up with a hidden blade. Bit different. At the time, OneUp.com ended its review by saying, "At least the groundwork is laid for a killer sequel." And this prophecy turned out to be bang on.
Incredible. Yes, it is.
For Assassin's Creed 2, Ubisoft tripled the size of the development team and improved on the first game in basically every possible way. Ezio was a warmer, more fleshed out character than the aloof Altair.
May I come in?
Fine, but only for a minute.
A minute is all I need.
Indeed.
Well, wait, that came out wrong.
He had access to a wider range of weapons, and as him, you could interact with NPCs in a bunch of different ways, use parkour more flexibly, and visit more detailed cities. Most importantly, the missions were much more varied and connected to the storyline, meaning it wasn't just the same old routine over and over again. The result was a game much closer to the original vision Ubisoft had been selling us on. And as a bonus, in Assassin's Creed 2, you could actually jump into water, where Ezio would hide skillfully. Unlike his assassin forebear, who would drown instantly. Score another win for Ezio.
Now move! Get the hell out of there!
All the games so far in this list have been the first entry in the series, but not this one, because sometimes a series can start fantastic, drastically dip in quality, and then get fantastic again. And when I say sometimes, I mean this one time. You don't need me to tell you that the first 4 numbered Resident Evils are superb survival horror games. Resident Evil 5 was the first sign the mainline series was straying from the assignment, when it abandoned the whole survival horror thing and ditched atmosphere for action. Things really went off the rails in 2012's Resident Evil 6 though, which doubled down by ramping up the action with a messy new cover system and a confusing story.
I lost all my men because of her! And I lost over 70,000 people, including the president, because of Simmons.
Sounds like you're both bad at your jobs. Just saying. Even though Resident Evil 6 sold more than 10 million copies, Capcom knew better than to push its luck with more of this high-octane action nonsense. So it course-corrected beautifully to give us Resident Evil 7 Biohazard in 2017, restoring the series to its former glory with proper scares and mounds of ick.
What the
I've never been so happy to see a 7-foot mold monster. In spite of this sequel having a first-person perspective, unlike any Resident Evil game before it, it felt more like a true Resi game than the two previous titles. And that's with the fact that Chris Redfield only shows up at the end and his face is all weird and different.
I'm Redfield. I'm glad we found you.
I'm glad you found me too, but what's with your face and what have you done with Chris?
You'd be forgiven for thinking that there are only 2 Red Dead games, on account of the latest one being Red Dead Redemption 2 and it having a 2 in the name. Seems like a clue. In reality, it's actually the 3rd game in the Red Dead franchise. Back in 2004, Rockstar San Diego, which was best known for the Midnight Club racing games, released Red Dead Revolver on the PS2 and Xbox. In it, you played as Red Harlow, a bounty hunter looking for revenge after his parents were murdered.
Get up, Pa! Pa!
So that's where the red in Red Dead Redemption comes from. I thought it was a reference to the gallons of blood I spilled all over the Old West. The more you know. Although players were keen on the game's Wild West setting, Red Dead Revolver only got half-decent reviews, with Metacritic scores in the low 70s. Many critics said it was too linear, with Entertainment Weekly calling it a rootin' Disneyland ride. Isn't that Big Thunder Mountain Railroad? You know what? Never mind. A full 6 years passed before Rockstar San Diego had another go, releasing the second game in the series, Red Dead Redemption.
What will you do now, Mr. Marston?
Now I'm gonna take my time and go after him the less kind way.
It's gonna be a bloody job.
I don't know any other kind.
The main difference this time was the decision to make the game open world, meaning you could now freely explore the states of New Austin and West Elizabeth instead of having to take on a bunch of linear gun-shooting missions. Where Red Dead Revolver scored in the low 70s, Red Dead Redemption scored a Metacritic of 95, which is roughly the number of minutes you have to wait to ride Big Thunder Mountain. Wait, it's all connected.
Looks like things is about to get settled once and for all. So it seems.
Alright, this video doesn't have a sequel yet, but it has a lot of prequels in that we've made many videos like this. So after you've clicked the like button to show your approval, which I assume you're offering given that you've got this far in the video, why not click one of these 2 videos? There's one up here from Outside Xtra, and there's one down here from Outside Xbox. Both excellent prequels. Enjoy them. They really fill in the lore, the backstory. You know, my previous career as a star F1 driver until I got that knee injury that really put the... It's all true. Watch the videos, find out.